We have with us today one of the foremost scholars on Russian-Iranian relations. Mark Katz is a professor of government and politics at George Mason University, where he's been teaching since 1988. And I gather several George Mason University students are here today, so we're happy to see you. Thank you for making the trek. It's not that far, but still. Professor Katz is here to shed light on a relationship that has long been of concern to the U.S., and of course that is the Iranian-Russian relationship. There is a perception here in the U.S. that it is a very close relationship, which isn't necessarily the case. However, both countries do share a certain antipathy toward the United States, and both, of course, would like to undermine U.S. influence in the Middle East. They have strong economic ties, and they've been cooperating on the nuclear issue for years. And the ultimate question today, which Professor Katz will be touching upon, along with other things, is given this close relationship, will the U.S. Be in a position to get Russia to sign on to Security Council sanctions directed against the Tehran government, should we decide to proceed in this direction? So we're very lucky to have Professor Katz here with us today to explore this topic. He's been exploring Russian-Middle East relations for the past 25 years plus Soviet and then Russian, I should say, foreign policy toward the Middle East. Some of his recent articles for Harvard University, Middle East Policy, and other publications about this topic include Obama's approach to Russia and Iran, today's topic, Saudi-Russian relations since the Abdullah Putin summit, and Russian-Iranian relations in the Ahmadinejad era. Dr. Katz is also the author of the book Russia and Arabia, Soviet Foreign Policy Toward the Arabian Peninsula, published by Johns Hopkins University Press. But before we begin, just a few quick announcements. Next week on Wednesday, February 3rd, we're having another program on Iran, although this time exploring the internal dynamics. We have one of our own scholars, Alex Vatanka, who will be dissecting the strengths and weaknesses of the Green Movement, and Ali Alfone of the American Enterprise Institute looking at the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And then the following week, on Tuesday, February 9th, we are doing something with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. That is a program on Pakistani counterinsurgency strategies with Haider Malik, a Pakistani scholar who's been writing extensively on this topic. And you can get more details at our website, www.mei.edu. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Mark Katz. Mark N. Katz, I should say.
Thanks very much, Kate. I appreciate that introduction. Glad to see some of my students here. Don't think I've seen them dressed up like this, but of course they haven't seen me dressed up either, so so we're even, I suppose. And actually it is a long way from George Mason. It's amazingly difficult to get here at this time of day. It's just almost like another country altogether. Haven't been here, I guess, at MEI for a few years. Some of you know I used to do, Soviet Middle Eastern relations in the past, and but then something happened, and that something was Gorbachev, and he did a number of things, but one of the things he did was to make Soviet foreign policy less interesting, because it was not such a threat. And some of you here may remember that in 1991, I know someone remembers, that I had an op-ed piece in the Outlook section of the Washington Post entitled, "Gorbachev Ruined My Career." And my only consolation was that he ruined his own as well. But what I didn't understand was just how thoroughly he was going to ruin it. In the 1990s, there was no interest in by now, Russian foreign policy. Class enrollments dwindled. I used to teach class, Russian politics and Russian foreign policy. I remember the fall of 1997, Russian foreign policy dwindled to 10 students. And the chairman of my department said that we had to combine these two classes because, after all, we only teach one class about every other of the region of the third world, don't we? And so things were not good. But then something else happened at the end of 1999, and that was the rise of Vladimir Putin. And early on, actually in the summer of 2000, I started to realize that this guy was interesting, very interesting indeed. And the following year, I went to Saudi Arabia as well as to Russia, and I published an article on Saudi-Russian relations in the Middle East Journal. Michael Collins Dunn was kind enough to do that for me. And it's been all systems go ever since. In fact, a couple of years, I had another article, this time in the Moscow Times, entitled, "Putin Saved My Career." And I'm only hoping that, my fear was that Medvedev would be, serious and would actually be in power and mess things up once again, but luckily that really quite has not happened. So here I am. In any event, what I want to talk about mainly is Russian-Iranian relations, since Obama has come into office. But to do that, I need to say something a little bit about the Obama administration's foreign policy, because this has had an effect on Russian-Iranian relations. Now, Obama came into office hoping to improve Iranian-American relations and also to improve Russian-American cooperation in many areas, but including on the Iranian nuclear issue. Now, by now, I think we know that the Obama administration has been disappointed in both instances. That clearly the effort to improve relations with Iran, has not exactly borne fruit, and the relationship with Russia is problematic. I believe there are three factors that have led to this state of affairs. One has to do with Iran, one has to do with Russia, and the other one has to do with both. With regard to Iran, the Obama administration signaled early on that it was far more interested in resolving the nuclear issue with the current government rather than promoting democratization and human rights. In other words, that obviously human rights is an important issue, but this was something of concern in Iran itself, whereas the nuclear question had a much broader impact. We couldn't change things in Iran, therefore let's work on what we can change. Why shout about democracy and human rights in Iran if we weren't going to change it? And if at the end of the day the government was going to remain in place, that's whom we had to do business with. But then, of course, with the contested elections this past June in Iran, and the Green Movement arose. But even then, the Obama administration's reaction to the protest had been fairly cool, especially at first. In other words, that we sort of bent over backwards to signal that we were not behind the opposition. The Iranian leadership, however, has claimed and may well believe that the Green Movement has been orchestrated by the United States. In other words, that nothing that they did that could have caused anything like this, that somehow America had to have orchestrated it. And if the U.S. can do this without having even a diplomatic presence in Iran, what could it do if there were normal relations between Iran and the U.S.? And therefore, the Obama administration's efforts to improve relations with the Islamic Republic, when the opposition to the regime had risen up so strongly, just appeared highly, highly suspicious to Tehran, and hence they were not so encouraged to take up Obama's offer. Now, with regard to Russia, Russia has benefited enormously from Iranian-American hostility. As a result of this, the U.S. has blocked Iran from serving as a corridor for Caspian Basin oil and gas from transiting Iran to reach the West. It has actively discouraged, and of course forbidden, discouraged European and other Western firms